Are you a believer in good? Do you love it when the good guy wins in the end? Then Charity Matters is just the place for you, where modern day heroes overcome incredible obstacles to save the day with their amazing work. Welcome to Season 5 of the Charity Matters podcast. I'm Heidi Johnson, nonprofit founder, lifelong helper, and your host. I've been interviewing the helpers for over a decade with our blog, and I'm so excited to be sharing these inspiring conversations with our podcast. Join me as we learn the challenges and stories of innovators, entrepreneurs, and modern day heroes who set out to solve the problems of humanity. Have you ever thought of the power that a story has to change someone's mind? Today's guest is no stranger to this fact. Nicole Smith is the founder of the Dignity Defense Institute, and I'm so excited to share her amazing journey and our inspiring conversation. You're not going to want to miss this. I'm so excited to have Nicole Smith with us today at the Dignity Defense Institute. Welcome, Nicole. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
We're so excited to have you. So let's just dive right in this morning. Talk to us about what the Dignity Defense Institute does.
Yes. So in order to really kind of paint the picture of what we do missionally, it's kind of important to almost kind of get my background to understand the purpose behind it. But if we want to just start with the mission.
Yeah, let's just start with the mission and then we'll go to the backstory, because the backstory is going to be a little meatier. Let's just get right into it.
So essentially, our primary focus is on educating on the foundation of human value in order to transform culture so that the offenses that we see within culture across the world typically is found within this idea that we can measure human value by another criteria other than simply being human. So if we were to educate culture on the inherent value of the human person, we change the course of offenses against the human person. So injustices we see within culture will diminish, essentially.
Okay, cool. Very cool. So tell me, did you grow up with a really philanthropic family? Did you grow up volunteering?
Yeah, actually, yes. My father by trade was an entrepreneur and inventor.
Cool.
But by service, they were youth ministers and college and career ministers that founded churches across part of the U.S. Yeah.
Wow.
And so I grew up with a lot of at-risk youth in our home. My mom was a counselor for juvenile detention center for girls in our community. An exposure to a world beyond just the four walls of our home that was very instrumental in forming what I would do in the future, I think. So
wow, I love hearing how people find service and how service finds people. And so often it's what's modeled in the home. And so often it's of course it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Good and bad behaviors are what we pick up, but it's just always so inspiring to me. And I think it's important just for parents who are listening to hear that when they're doing something, they don't realize that those little sponges are mimicking that. And they may not see it right away, but it does.
Yeah. Well, and it was kind of this idea in the home, if someone needed help, you get up and do it. And it so much so that my brother, it's just an impulse. You wouldn't even think to do anything but help, because that's just what we always did. And
because that's all you know.
Yeah, exactly. So, it has its bad sides too. Sometimes you can be sort of overutilized because people understand that about
people
you,
realize you're identified as a helper / doer, which means if there's something to be done, we know who to call. So it definitely is a double-edged sword.
Yeah, exactly.
I walk this walk. I get this. I get this routine.
Yeah.
So, people, I always say this, people, when they're young, they say, when I grow up, I want to be XYZ. And nonprofit founder is just really never has made the top 10 of anyone that I have met in my conversations.
Yes.
So there's a journey, a backstory that you alluded to earlier. Everybody has one that leads us down this path. Obviously, your family was really philanthropic, and so that was part of it. But tell us the moment that you knew that you needed to do this. You needed to start the Dignity Defense Institute. What what happened? What's the story that led to this? Because you don't just wake up and start a business like this.
Yes. So, as a child, I was always sort of governmentally minded. So like I was aware of what was going on in culture at a very young age. My parents always sort of thought it was sort of strange because they weren't really oriented in that way. And I just always seemed to like be aware, right?
Right.
And so I grew up and I got an undergraduate in political science and a master's in law and public policy with the intention of going forth being an attorney or something in the public space.
Right.
But I ended up sort of landing on the communication side of the public policy world. It wasn't intentional, but I graduated during the recession and attorneys were a dime a dozen. So I sort of took a different track, right? So I ended up getting a job at a constitutional law firm controlling their communication. And we called it the Court of Public Opinion. So we had a lot of affiliates across the world in which we would advocate on their behalf for different cases. Okay, so like an example would be a child bride of Uganda or a sex slave of Afghanistan. We did a lot of cases of imprisoned religious minorities, Turkey, Sudan, like Iran. We did a lot of different varying cases. So it's good to note this sort of build up because I saw a lot of success. Let's just say that. So,
that's great. I was going to say the opposite. I was thinking and hearing this, you saw a lot of trauma and you saw a lot of pain and you saw a lot of the worst of humanity. I did not expect the word success to end that sentence at all.
Yeah. So I would say a convergence of pain with justice. Like, I was going into places in the world in which justice wasn't often seen. So if you were going to go into Iran, justice is not what you would come out of the court system's finding. Mm-hmm. So we would go to the Court of Public Opinion. We had one of the cases where he was a joint American-Iranian citizen, but we advocated on his behalf. We got over 1 million signatures on his behalf. Obama included him on his Iranian deal.
Wow.
So we, another one out of Sudan, Angelina Jolie became a part of her case, including the Pope, and she was released. She's in the United States now too. So that's what I mean by success in the sense of you
move the needle, right? You move the needle. And through communication and gathering people and bringing a point or a problem to people's attention, you were able to impact change. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was an I mean, like just never imagined being in that space, right? And having that sort of influence in a positive way. But I often got this question throughout the years. I specialize in the sale of ideas, right? So it's intrinsically different than the sale of things. I got a lot of people coming to me wanting to take on their causes, that kind of stuff. So it was lovely in that sense. I got more and more experience in this space but often people would ask me, how does this weigh on your heart? Like, this is really hard to handle, knowing and
the suffering.
Yeah. And I said, it is very weighing. And over the years, it got heavier and heavier and heavier because I got the sense of I wasn't really doing anything to change the tide, right? I got to take one little girl that had been, her innocence had been stripped from her and sold into marriage. And I got to buy back her dowry and I got to put her back into an education system. But the problem is that there's another little girl right behind her on her heels, right behind her, right?
It's the starfish on the beach.
Yes.
It's I just saved one, and it feels like, but you look around and there's the beach is full of them. And do you make a difference by just saving that one? And I think that the hardest thing for nonprofit founders, or one of them, being a helper, whatever you want to call us, maybe all of the above, is that moment when you realize you can't save them all.
Yes.
And it is, we start out thinking we're only going to help one, and then we want to help more and more. And then we realize we can only help what we can help. And it's a really hard, it's a hard cross to bear, I think, is really because we have, to your point, you have a little girl you think about every night that you couldn't help.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's that conundrum, but it's better helping who we can than not helping at all.
Yeah. So two other events sort of happened. The first event, I sort of had one of those epiphany moments where, God holds you up and you're just walking around your house in prayer and trying to seek out answers for yourself and trying to weigh. And I just kept crying out to God going, okay, like, how do there's so many issues to tackle. Like I want to hold each little girl's hand and I want to make a real difference. And he just told me that it's not that we have a lot of issues. We have one issue only. And it's my image is beyond valuable. And we as human people, just by consequence of being human alone, hold intrinsic value that must be protected. And within culture, the Sudanese culture versus the Indian culture versus American culture, we all do the same thing. The same root cause is that we devalue the human person, and that way we can create offenses against them. It's just different. Culture is going to interpret the same thing. So it was just one of these like, oh my goodness, like, you're right. There is one only issue. And if you were to have culture understand that you cannot damage the human value, you cannot create offenses against them. Of course, you're never going to, because it's humanity, or they're never going to be wholly just. But to transform those culture, you kind of stem that tide, that is the need for it. And so you're in,
forgive me for interrupting, but so you're in sense taking, it's almost that you're taking on the continuation of the work you were doing before
on a foundation,
on a different level.
Yes.
But it's still similar work using your communication skills to help bring attention to inhumane acts or unkindnesses or situations or problems around the globe.
Yeah, exactly. And, that drove me to found Dignity Defense Institute. But I was further emboldened. So this was like 2020, January. I
what a difference that was, right?
Yeah, I was like, oh my goodness. Like in January, I go to DC to sort of launch this concept with a group of individuals. And then I step off the plane square into a global pandemic.
Right. Yeah.
It was interesting to watch the world at that time. And also by consequence, I was pregnant with my second little daughter. And she would be born in distress and sustain brain injury during that process. And she now has cerebral palsy as a result. And
how old is she now? She's little, right?
She's 3.
Oh,
she's 3. She just turned 3. So she's still nonverbal and she's still not walking. But it's one of those things that she'll see both sides of visible and invisible disabilities in her life. She's come a really long way. But I mentioned her birth because I say it's when the mission was given flesh and bone in our life, right? So I had helped these little girls across the world and I could never hug them. I could never, give them a kiss and tell they were special, like they deserved. But now I could do that to my own daughter. In a really meaningful way. And so, our mission is very whole person centric. So we base our organization around action committees. So these action committees are in all the different, what we call symptom industries. So trafficking, disability community, porn culture, drug culture, those are different, like affronts to the human person. They're all really interconnected. And the thing that I feel like is so important to being centered around these action committees, we fill them with experts that both have professional experiences, but also personal experiences. So like one of our human trafficking is headed up by someone that was raised in the sex industry, but she's also a mental health counselor. We, and all of our industries are like that. So disability community, obviously,
Right.
we're a part of it, and it's head up by the head of DIDD in the state of Tennessee, which his daughter also has disabilities as well. So we want people to understand that they're important and loved and seen because we know what you're going through too.
So do you try to get a story, a person, and I'm not saying like a poster child, because there's thousands of children that are trafficked, and there's thousands of people in the drug culture. I mean, you could, like the starfish on the beach, you could pick, but do you try to find that story per the Angelina Jolie, little girl story, find a story and then build around that story to bring attention? Is that kind of the strategy?
Yes. And the biggest part of it, obviously, we want to see that people understand the experiential aspects means it is real within culture. Like it's actually happening today.
Right.
Because a lot of times, especially in America, Western culture, we're really sort of unaware. Like we keep ourselves unaware. We feel like we know, but that we don't to what's happening.
Well, storytelling is so powerful. And when you think about nonprofits, I mean, we don't have a product that we sell.
Yes.
We are, to your point of selling ideas, we are selling, sharing visions and stories of real people that are suffering, that need help.
To translate it in a meaningful way.
Into action, to create action from the story. And I think that the fine line we walk in our business, for example, I'm a trustee at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and I've been involved with CHLA for over 20 years, started a nonprofit there actually to provide chaplains of all faiths for families.
Yeah.
And, but when we try to tell those stories, it's such a fine line of you never want to exploit, you never want to cross this line, right? But so there's a razor thin line in sharing a story about a sick child, for example, who went home after an incredible surgery and is healthy, or whatever happened, or had an amazing experience.
I always called it selling dead babies. That's what it is.
Yeah, but there's something, to me, it's not that, like, to me, it's
the point at which you go to the other side is like you
just can't cross that line.
Yes.
There's anyone who does this work, no matter what cause you stand behind, that line, like, it is like, when you hit it, and you cannot cross it, because there's a point. And obviously in your partnership with these families, we support and tell their stories.
Yes.
But in your line of work, when you're dealing with different cultures, and the lines still exist.
Yes.
But I think it's I'm just fascinated. It's different, right?
Yeah. Well, so a good example, one of the stories we've told is my daughter's story. And really it's to pose the concept of what's the inherent value of the human person? Is it a meeting of an expectation? So do we place value on our child based off them meeting our expectations? So for her, she was totally normal up until the point of her birth. She basically died on the table and was resuscitated. And there are laws going into effect, or at least being proposed on the state level, that would allow doctors to advise to not resuscitate her, because they make a theory on what the outcome is in that moment that would mean that my child will have disabilities and her life won't have the same value, because life might be challenging or difficult.
Right.
And so we put to challenge a person's value based off of this idea of unmet expectations, or perhaps expectations of potential struggle. And so really to kind of ask that question, what is her value? Does it ride on her meeting those expectations, or, just to almost get culture or people that ability to ask those questions and then think through them themselves. Just by
put themselves in your shoes as a mother and a parent,
Yeah.
What is the other side of this, rather than hearing the news, the statistics, that
Yes.
here's a real story, here's a real family, here's a real
Well,
situation.
And the idea too, that like my experience is you have a physician telling you the potential outcome, and the reality is they don't know. They
Right.
absolutely don't, but they tell
Right.
you they do. And like in the hospital systems, like I get it's very liability oriented. They don't want
Right.
to.
Well, everything in the
someone-
United States is run
It's-
by
if
attorneys.
if I could tell you the full story rounding like how much our story was tied to the fear of the liability that we posed to the system, it was just really very disheartening.
Yeah. I
And
can only imagine.
yeah, and so this idea like she'll never walk, she'll never talk, and I can't, or she'll never do this or that or whatever. And she's been able to surmount those things. And if we were to somebody that just listens in that moment, because I've
Right.
actually had families, a child was born similar to my daughter, and they lived in Colorado, and they did propose death by medical neglect. So essentially, they allow them to just be put into a facility in the hospital, and they just stop caring for them, so they'll die. Now,
Oh my God. I've never heard of that before.
yeah,
Wow.
and so those are the up to 28 days after birth. Some of the legislation has been proposed. And this is in Colorado. This child was born before these pieces of legislation are being like proposed in the system.
Right.
So it's actually happening, but they want to protect themselves legally. That's why they want to pass some of the laws. So
Wow.
anyway, yeah,
That's a whole can of worms that I don't think I want to open right now.
But
wow.
Yeah, to ask those questions, like,
Right.
and to bring up the fact that injustices kind of are happening, and to be more provoking, like to come to those conclusions on your own instead of just taking what you're told about stuff.
Right.
Because people are experiencing this, and you don't know it is. And again, the media is like not always telling us all the
Right. It's making you think. So
Mhm.
speaking of challenges, which obviously you face as a mother, we all face challenges as parents, but you
Amen.
have additional, there's no parents on this planet who don't have challenges. Not
yeah.
a one.
Yeah.
At least I've never met one.
Yeah.
And I say this is kind of not the end of my finish line, but celebrating my son's college graduation next weekend.
Oh yeah.
Feeling like my
Congratulations.
last son, my third son. So it feels like a milestone. Like I'm running through like the tape, right? It feels
Yeah.
like this moment.
Now you're about to get a raise. You're about to get a
I'm
raise.
feeling like a raise is in my future. I'm not sure,
Yes.
but I'm feeling that way. I'm feeling
Mhm.
cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
But as for challenges, as starting a nonprofit, starting an organization, you're obviously a parent. You're a parent of a child that has, significant, needs in addition to your daughter, both your kids. You still have laundry, you still have dishes, and you're trying to save the world. And it's hard. It's hard. So talk to me about
yeah.
like what fuels you to keep doing this when those days you think, I don't know if I can like help somebody else. I can barely help myself.
Yes.
What fuels you to keep doing this work?
So I think maybe as mothers, I mean, obviously I'm not a dad, so I can't really speak to like the introspective portions of those experiences. The COVID made our journey with my youngest very, very lonely, and it made it very introspective on a level that I don't think it would have been so much so. And I've learned a lot of lessons throughout that process just because of the deep introspection that I got by the consequence of just what society and culture was doing at the time.
Right.
And
we'll get to life lessons at the end, but
yeah. But to take those moments in stride and take your victories and your failures in stride, because it's going to happen. And to be patient with that process has been that's what this last 3 years have been for it organizationally, but those lessons have gone over into the organization, but it's gone over into my motherhood too. It's been a joint process of overflow.
Well, and it's just when we, we're moms, our lives without our work are already very full.
Yes.
And then you add trying to help other people's lives makes it, when I started spiritual care, my kids were, I think, maybe 19
Oh, yeah.
months, maybe 4 and maybe 6. They were little. They thought
Yes.
I was the president of Children's Hospital. They they had
I
no
love
idea.
it. Yeah.
And I was doing it as a volunteer, right? And I was
Yeah.
doing it as a volunteer. There was no income associated with this,
Yeah.
with starting this.
I
And
know that feeling.
I remember, I mean, I had, 2 in diapers or 1 in diapers at least,
Mm.
and starting a nonprofit and thinking, have I lost my mind? Am I crazy? Like, what's wrong with me? And
I
part
know.
of, I think, even Charity Matters, which ultimately came out of this, was trying to find my people. You talked
Yeah.
about being alone, during COVID. You want to find your tribe, right? And I'm like, who are these crazy people who start nonprofits?
I know.
What's wrong with them? Who are
I think
they?
it's a breed, right? So I thought about this a lot too throughout the last 3 years, is like, uh, I would be like lost if I didn't, right? Like I'm a better
it's who we
mom
are.
because I'm a better mom because I do this, because
Right.
I can, that cross purpose that my brain needs something more than just laundry, right?
Right.
And those
Right.
are very important components to life. But if I just had to look forward to laundry every day,
Right.
I don't know if I
Right.
would survive it,
Right. Right.
So
And you walking, and like your parents did before you, they
Mhm.
showed you what it is to be a human in the human experience, to care
Yeah.
and love for other people besides your children and yourself.
Yeah.
And that this is part of this is why we're here, to serve each other.
Yes. And to pass
You're
that on to
doing
our
the same,
children. Yeah,
to do
pass
the
it on to
same
our
that your
children.
parents did for
Yeah.
you, that you're doing
Mhm.
for them.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I always say, the bucket is heavy, and there's
Yeah.
some days you just think, how am I going to pick this bucket up? So, talk to me
Mhm.
about successes. Talk to me about impact. When you're in communications and a storyteller, are you measuring impact by eyeballs? Are you measuring by Instagram? Are you measuring by what metrics are you measuring impact? And I also would say impact is twofold, because impact, there's two sides to impact. Impact is, yes, you freed this child from prison or whatever, and
Mhm.
you had a result with this child because you told the story and got the people to drive to make a change. But then the impact, how do you measure that child is free? How do you measure
Yes.
the impact of that child's going on, having a productive life, and having this, how do you measure that?
Yes.
So
So,
I'm just
yeah.
curious how you would measure impact for Dignity Defense.
Yeah. Well, so even just going back as far as I have with any of the cases that I've taken on from the beginning of my career, it was, obviously you're in this buildup of a campaign that the end result is obviously freedom from their circumstance. But you're right. The point of freedom is not always the end result. It's just what you're doing within that campaign. So I call it the short term and the long term goal. You have to be focused on that short term, because that's the climax, the shift in perspective of the impact for that individual. And then to be patient enough for what that long-term goal is beyond it is really important. So just from the concept of what we're doing at Dignity Defense is that a lot of times you have to make short-term changes in which we can't be so impatient that we don't have long-term goals too, because it takes time to change culture. And so
Right.
it's not going to just be like overnight. So we have to look at those metrics internally of the impact that we're having with, I say the epiphany point, where the individual that you speak to gets it. I can't tell you the rewarding feature of that, where the light goes on their eyes. Oh my goodness, you're right. Our
Right.
culture does do this, and this, because, well, technically it's the same principle as slavery. We kind of make that a thing of the past, but like human trafficking is thriving in our communities. It's because it's invisible, these things that they don't see, and they put their head in the sands over. And that alone, that understanding alone, is the start of that change. That's our short term. And our long-term result is that culture does change. And we do have, our idea is like to unify and amplify all of the dignity community. So the charities that you're speaking about and the ones that are taking action, we want to make their job easier.
Right.
The idea of shifting culture.
Well, I have a list for you. I have.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so we want to almost partner. I think it's because all the years I've worked with nonprofits as a consultant and the communications and like brand building, I realize how many nonprofits just really want to meet the people that they mean to serve. But sometimes they don't have the resources for it. So sometimes they're like, hey, if we can come to Dignity Defense, and they'll be that funnel for us. They'll be able to find the individuals we need to serve, and they'll be able to tell the stories about the people we serve, and they'll be a great resource for nonprofits as well. So yeah.
That's great. Well, nonprofits obviously need all the help they can get.
Oh yeah. No, I get it. And
you are one.
Yeah.
And I'm trying just like shine a little light on all these.
You're doing a great
all
job.
Thank you. All these beautiful souls doing good work. I'm like, if I can just help the helpers, then I can exponentially help more people. That's my strategy. So I'm just trying to like shine a light on all of you.
You're doing the same thing that we're trying to do. It's a foundational portion. You're getting before the discussion about all of these things and really exacting change for the individuals that are impacted. It's a good thing.
Oh, I never thought about that, but thank you. I appreciate that, Nicole. So if you could dream any dream for Dignity Defense, what would that look like?
Oh my gosh. So obviously increase our reach. Obviously we want to have a greater reach within our communities so that we can really creatively educate, through stories, but through just really thought-provoking ideas of questions posing. That's a big dream, is just the growth and influence, because that's how we educate, right? So more people.
Right.
But also to have more of those stories of victory, because we are getting a lot of those stories coming in at like my daughters, but we've had a lot of different types of stories of drug addiction and trafficking, and people that have had their climax moment and they're on the other side of it and they're living their new normal, right? Because it's not the same as it was before, but it is their new normal, and it's a journey until we pass to the other side.
I love that. Well, I'm a storyteller, and I love telling stories. So I love that you are bringing stories together to share the power that they have to change people's ideas and to ultimately change the world. I mean, I think it's so important. So what you mentioned earlier, some lessons you were learning during COVID, but talk to me about just some life lessons you've learned from this experience of starting Dignity Defense. What life lessons have you learned on this journey since, I guess, 2020? And obviously some of them come from just being a mom and all the lessons you're learning through that, which is your story, is part of the Dignity Defense's story. So what are those lessons that you can share with us? Yeah.
So one I would say is that not everyone is going to get it. Not everyone is going to care. And that's okay. They're not meant to, because we all have our own calling, and sometimes your mission is not their mission.
Right.
And so when you come into a donor meeting, or you come into just, a room full of people that you speak and try to convey this important mission, and a lot of them come, maybe some of them come away just not caring or not getting it. It's because they're not your people. They're not your people. Right. And not to take that hard, because they're not meant to be. Yeah.
Right. I think that's tough. I agree with that. I think that's a hard, when we care so passionately about something, we think everyone's going to care passionately about it. And that isn't necessarily always the case.
Yeah. And you get that, cool. Bye.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Moving on. Yeah. And I think that you're right in understanding and respecting that everybody has a different path and different things they care about, and different journeys that led them to care about. They had a grandmother that had breast cancer, and that's all of a sudden that's what they care about. And they experienced this and they care about that. That's what we have 1.6 million nonprofits, because there's so many missions and things that we have to all go through to pick our projects.
And I'll again, like the overflow into motherhood. that was an epiphany I had in my 20s that I just used to take to heart so much what people would feel about me as a person. And I would think there was something wrong with me. And I had this epiphany, like sometimes I'm not someone's cup of tea, and there's nothing wrong with that person. And there's
Right.
nothing wrong with me. It's just
Dating,
not, we're
right.
not meant for each other,
Right.
right? Even as friends. And I try to teach my daughters that, because it's a very transformative, freeing feeling, even in business, like we're talking about coming
Right.
in. And if somebody walks away, there's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing
Right.
wrong with them.
You weren't rejected. It just, the shoe
Yes.
didn't fit.
The shoe
It
didn't
wasn't,
fit.
it didn't fit. It just
And-
wasn't the right shoe. But there's a lot
Exactly.
of great shoes. I mean, we're in my closet. There's a lot
Yes.
of great shoes.
Yeah. And so the
There's
arduous
always a
part,
shoe that's going to fit.
yeah, the arduous part is finding that right shoe, and then having the perspective to understand that you shouldn't want the one that doesn't fit just because it validates you in
Right.
that moment. So there's
Right.
going to be a punishment in the long run for trying to shove your foot in it.
Yet
It shouldn't belong.
you will be in pain. You will be in
Yes.
a lot of pain.
Yes. Yeah.
Definitely find the right shoe and keep
Yes.
shopping, people. Keep shopping.
Right. Yeah.
So talk to me how this journey has changed you. Do you think that you've changed in the last
Oh
few years?
gosh.
I would think
Yes.
so.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, like, again, my 10 plus year career has been around nonprofits and nonprofit leaders and nonprofit volunteers and all this, you know,
Right.
but it's a different perspective when you're on the other side of that. It was interesting. You know, I've grown millions and millions of dollars in donor money, but I've never been on the other initiating part of that journey, where I've always built amplified off of a
Right.
starting point, right? And to take responsibility for that has been just really very challenging, because it's hard to start.
Daunting.
Very, very daunting. And, you know, I still have a long way to go. You know, we're still a new organization. We're still
Right.
budding. We're still, you know, and there's been more delays than I ever wanted to, because my daughter is my priority. You know,
Right.
her care is very important to me. But there is victory in those lessons that I can't, I would never want to take back, you know, even if
Right.
it didn't, like, it didn't grow into this massive idea that just changed the face of our world. I can't take back the lessons that I learned, and I'm a different person because of it.
And how do you think you're different?
I patient, definitely
Right.
more patient. Yeah, I stronger in a position of taking ownership over every decision. You know, before I
That's a
could
good
kind of
one.
like kick things
Right.
off, where you had to take it, look at it, and go, okay, no, I get to take ownership of this wholly, even if I
Right.
have, you know, these really powerful people around me that are speaking into it. I have to take ownership of it wholly, for positive or for negative. It's mine.
Good for you.
And you know, before I'm kind of a go with flow kind of girl. and
that is not a typical fit for a nonprofit founder. Usually
Yeah.
we're kind of type A, and we're really high
Yeah.
strung, and we're whirling dervishes lots of times.
Yeah.
And so I love hearing that. That's a breath of fresh air.
Well, and I guess
That's
just,
probably a great fit, actually, because
yeah, calm down. It's going to be fine.
take a breath and it'll
yeah.
all be fine.
Yeah, but to some extent, it meant that, like, if somebody made up their mind about something and said, you know, you should do this, I didn't have to necessarily think objectively on it and take ownership of it myself, because I was like, hey, they're doing it, it's fine. Like, but now it's my
Right.
idea, and, you know, it's my ball to move forward with the help
You're
of,
the quarterback, and you gotta run across the line.
Yeah. And go,
Yeah.
okay, is this good or is this bad for the long run? You know, is this shoe really going to fit properly? And
Right.
take ownership of that, because, you know, some of great opportunities have come our way, and where I had to say no to them because they were going to be a bad fit for the long run.
Right.
You know, even if it's donor dollars, I couldn't believe this, but I've turned away donor dollars because it's not been a good fit.
I know, and I think that that's good, because we have to do that. We can't just, if everybody just followed the money, imagine
Yes.
what this world would be like. Well, we already know what this world would be like. I think
Yeah.
I think we're somehow living a little bit of that, but we're not going to go into the politics of the
Yeah,
world.
yeah. Oh, I know.
But I
was like,
do
this will
think
come back to haunt us. and we
yeah,
don't
I
need
do.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that I do think that people need to think about that sometimes. That's a whole other podcast that we could talk about.
There you
That
go.
would be a good one. But tell us how we can support you, where we can donate, speaking of donor dollars, where we can get involved, where we can
Yeah.
follow you on Instagram.
So really all of my social media handles are going through me for the most part right now, just because I'm a mouthpiece of it. So mine is pretty much anything, LinkedIn to Instagram to Facebook. It's at Nicole M.Y. Smith. So it's my middle name
Okay.
initials. And our website is dignitydefense.org. And I also have my own podcast that's called Pro Dignity, No Doubt. And it's a lot of stories that we were talking about where we get to do a long form, tackle some pretty heady issues, pretty deep, sometimes dark starting stories, that then we get to see the light at the end. It's been a really wonderful experience meeting so many like powerful, encouraging people that have come through some really hard things. So
I love that. I love anyone who's shining light on things, but sometimes you got to get in the dark to get to the light. So
I know. And that is the human condition. I know in the West, we often try to say that it is our desire through wealth and influence to escape struggle. But like you were talking about, there is no place to escape it. No matter how much money you have, it will always find you in a different form. And I think a lot of the struggles we have with our youth are tied to that lie. And so when they start to experience them and life is just awful and hard and difficult, it's good to hear that story of someone else that's come through those same things to learn those lessons and go, okay, I'm not alone. Like what you're doing with charity.
Look at us, right?
Yes,
We're doing
Not
it right
alone.
now. Well, we'll rock on for doing that. I love that. Thank you, Nicole, for sharing your stories. Thank you for using your gifts of storytelling to make the world better. I love what you're doing. I think it's so great. And I can't wait to see Dignity Defense just explode and helping change all of these lives and changing the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Charity Matters podcast. I really enjoyed talking to our guest, Nicole Smith, about what it takes to start a business that truly changes people's lives. I think Nicole's comment about taking ownership of your life and your organization was really inspiring and true. To learn more about modern day heroes like Nicole, or if you'd like to reach out to us, visit us at charity-matters.com or connect with us on Instagram at Charity Matters. If you enjoyed our conversation, we would love it if you shared it with your family and friends. And please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. But more than that, thank you for caring, for believing in goodness, and for being a part of our movement. You are exactly what the world needs more of. And remember that together we can make a difference, one small act of kindness at a time. Charity matters. See you next time.